I see, Ambassador Suri, you have vetted the appetite of the audience from the number of questions in the chat box. But first, let me, if he so desires, invite Professor Pant into the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Singh. Well, it was very, really a new kind of a presentation on the country, and lots of informations were there. But the idea of this dialogue is, as Professor Kumaraswamy says, is to know, to get more from the ambassadors. So rather putting the comfortable question, I will make a couple of uncomfortable, and I hope Ambassador Suri will not mind it, which is in the spirit of, see, the question of saying that there is a kind of chemistry matching between the two leadership. Uh, is this a sign of a strong relationship or a fragile relationship? Because by that logic, if the tomorrow leadership of any of the two countries is no more there, then what happens to this relationship? So I think the explanation has to be much more than the personality matching. This is one. I mean, I would like you to react to it. Second thing, which you said that I think in last part of the conversation, you made it very clear that there was a, it's not when they the Islamic quotient in the entire GCC countries undergoing a shift, especially after the ISI is coming there, and therefore you find moderation taking place, and that is what UAE is doing. But you made a very interesting observation that they find comfortable with secular India. Now, given the fact that, please again, this is my personal view, there is a shift in India's secularism, or in fact, it is being redefined. I don't know how do you feel they find same level of comfort, or still they have a vision of Nehru's India, the kind of secularism which we used to talk about. Third question, which you said, I would like you to tell us more as information. You said the ambassadors play a very important role in mobilizing the FDIs there. Now, about these two refineries which we are talking, we are very, very glamorous kind of investment coming here. Could you please tell us that what kind of, how this ice breaking took place there? Because as an ambassador, what kind of nudging was there which you did there? Because that's for a student, it's very important to understand it, because that is there. And lastly, Ambassador Suri, please tell us that how you 10 years down the line you have an imagination about UAE, which I think many of us will agree with you. But how do you position India and China in 10 years down the line? Are we, there is the perception that Chinese are not the taking over is not the right word, but very hugely present there. But we have the advantage of our history and advantage of our civilizational linkages there. But how long this civilization linkages or legacy is going to help us to against the Chinese, technology and things like that? If you can reflect upon, it will be great help us to understand what is happening in UAE. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Pant. I think those are four excellent questions, and I will try to give you honest and substantive answers to all of them. On the first one, on the importance of personal relationships, I would say that this varies from country to country. My own experience, say, having served in Australia, is that countries where institutions are very strong, processes are very strong, personal relationships make a difference on the margins. Because at the end of the day, the bureaucracy will kick in and the processes will take over. In countries like UAE, which are monarchies, very hierarchical, very top-down, personal relationships matter a lot, because the processes are almost non-existent. The bureaucracies are fairly fragile or timid. And if the instruction comes from the boss, do this, the chances are that it'll get done. So I would, in the specific case of Gulf monarchies, and remember that because they are not, they've tended to be fairly stable monarchies as dynasties go over the last few decades. Whether you see in Qatar, whether you see in Kuwait, whether you see and they carry a fairly long historical and memories of how they were treated, and you know, the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's Republic Day visit. Because India's had such a large profile in that country, and at least until they became extremely rich, until 73, let's say. You know, if there was one city that they knew, it was Bombay. For health, for tourism, for education, for business. And so Sheikh Mohammed told me soon after the visit, he said, when I came back, and because it got such full page coverage in the media, he said, I go to Japan, I go to America, I go to Germany. It doesn't excite my people. But the pictures of me on Republic Day being honored in India meant something different to his people. And I think that emotional context is something that we should understand. On the issue of Islamic moderation and secular India, so I think let's break it up at two levels. One is Dr. Anwar Gargash, for example, the Minister of State, who is a very, he's a doctorate in international relations from Oxford, etc., very learned man, would often say, how is it that India has contributed fewer people to ISIS than Tunisia, than even Belgium? Surely there must be something that you're doing right. That the level of radicalization in India remains far less than in Muslim countries, or even in some European countries with Muslim minorities. So there is a certain interest in trying to understand that part of the Indian model. And I have been fairly vocal in saying that a part of the investment that Mr. Modi has made personally in the relationships, the personal relationships that we spoke about, is actually undermined by the right-wing fringe of his own party. You know, the Islamophobic comments that emanate from sections, and we had a few months back this very well-publicized case of an MP from Karnataka saying something particularly outrageous. And it did catch attention of the people there, and it was commented upon. So I don't think we should, they are not lost in a Nehruvian India. Allow me to emphasize, they are very well read, they are very au fait with what is going on, and they have the resources to hire the best advisors, including some very well-informed Indians to advise them. So they understand what's going on. They may not say it openly because to them, the relationship is more important. But I certainly feel that, and this is something that I've pointed out, that we shouldn't take this for granted. We no longer live in a world where something can be said for domestic consumption with the expectation that it will not radiate overseas. It does.
Right.
Your third point about the oil concession. So let me say, when soon after Sheikh Mohammed's visit for the Republic Day and the agreement to deepen energy sector cooperation, there was an advertisement that ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, is announcing, inviting bids for concessions. So I sought a meeting. I went to meet the number 2 person who was head of upstream activities and exploration and so on, and said that, look, we've just come back from a very successful visit by the Crown Prince, and we will be very keen to participate in this bid. And he smiled at me. He's been in that job for 20 years. I was only 2 months old in mine in Abu Dhabi. So he smiles at me and he says, Ambassador, we would love to, but believe me, it's not going to happen. And I was taken aback. I said, why? He said, because I know your systems. Firstly, you will never be able to put a bid in time. Our timelines are very tight, and your bureaucracy doesn't allow that. And secondly, your people expect an internal rate of return, an IRR, which bears no relationship to reality. You have to tell your people that there's a direct correlation between risk and return. And if they are going to make risky investments in Venezuela or Nigeria or somewhere else, then obviously there's an expectation for a higher IRR. But and they expect an IRR of 13, 14, 15%. But if you're going to invest in UAE, which is next door to you, politically stable, no currency risk because the UAE dirham is pegged to the US dollar, then you have to appropriately modify your expectation of the return as well. And I said, this guy is talking sense. So, I called up my friends in Ministry of Petroleum and I said, look, this is what I've heard. And are we willing to take it up as a challenge? And I was able to bring in MEA, PMO, and Petroleum into this to say, how do we get this organized? Essentially, it came down to this, that we had to put in $600 million. Now, $600 million means it has to go to the Cabinet Committee of Economic Affairs, and therefore it will not be able, they can't do it within the timelines required. But in this case, we got creative and we split that 600 million 3 ways between IOC, HPCL, and BPCL. And IOC agreed to take the lead. And the 200 million each came within their Navratna status, and it didn't need to go to the cabinet committee. The second thing was their boards had said that they should not invest below 13%. And these guys are saying anything more than high single digit, 8%, 9% is a non-starter. So again, we had to do convincing. And I told our people, I said, look, I don't want you to make a loss. This should be commercial investment for you. But in commercial investment, at least reevaluate the risk, reevaluate the fact that today your interest rates at which you borrow are at historic lows. So if you're going to borrow at 2%, then certainly, an 8%, 9% IRR looks more realistic than before. So again, the boards of each of the 3 companies met and changed that they would be willing to go for this. With that, we were able to get shortlisted, but we were still not there. And one day I get a call from a very senior person that I won't name saying, look, Ambassador, you've done something phenomenal. Your bid is in time and it is a valid bid. Now, the problem is because these are producing fields, my boss, the boss, is getting calls from Macron for Total. He's getting calls from so-and-so for Japan. He's getting so-and-so for Italy. And when the file goes to him, I don't want him to think that my friend Modi hasn't called me.
Okay.
So, I also thought about it. Anyway, I spoke with my colleague in PMO and I said, I don't want us to lose the game in the 50th over. We're so close to it now. So anyway, we worked out something that, why don't you say Happy New Year? Or hope you've had a good visit, etc., and I look forward to seeing you. And also slip this in. And within hours of that call, we got the confirmation that the contract has been signed. So that's my third on your point. And the fourth, you said about China and India. Look, we are facing China everywhere. In the UAE, we had a huge advantage, which is being eroded for 2 reasons. One is China has moved in late, but aggressive. And with their capacity to build infrastructure the way they are able to do and the products that they are able to supply, by one estimate, they've already overtaken India as UAE's largest trading partner, and we are now number 2. having said that, and yes, they are also able to leverage their capacity for defense supplies. So, for example, when the Emiratis were very keen to get the Predator drones from the Americans, and the Americans were being iffy, the Chinese provided them the Winglung. And the Emiratis were quite happy to show them off as to the Americans as a negotiating tool. At this point, I would still say that the relationship between the Emiratis and the Chinese is a very transactional one. I don't think it has the kind of cultural connect that they enjoy with us. And certainly the people connect that they enjoy with us. Remember that there's an Indian in every household, every institution, right? So I think we still have an advantage. My worry is about our capacity to frustrate our friends. And that is undimmed. So you know, in this case, you know, the friends seem to have all the right intent, but you know, they wanted to source defense supplies from us. But if anybody's tried to work with OFB, they have no concept of a commercial deal. So you know, there are things that we need to do at our end to improve systems. I hope I've tried to give you an honest answer to all your 4 excellent questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Suri. I think there's so much interest that with your permission, we will extend the session slightly. And if I may bring into the conversation Professor Kumaraswamy, because he has a series of questions to ask you. May I suggest that you ask them one by one rather than all in one go? Otherwise, you will hog the whole period of the conversation. Not that it will be any loss, but it will be a great gain to this audience. But please go ahead.
Thanks, Ambassador. And I didn't want to come because I leave it. I'll just keep it to only one question. And since you are very candid in admitting the nuances of the relationship, can you tell us what is the constant complaint you hear in Emirates about India's handling of the relationship? Thanks.
I think the one constant is our inability to translate promise into reality. And often it is driven by our own processes. Often the systems that we use to, I think it's the fear psychosis in Indian bureaucracy of the inability to take decisions or stick your neck out and make something happen that can frustrate people. So, you know, you can have the Prime Minister giving an assurance that something will get sorted out. And then, you know, months can go because, and that's with all of the persistent follow-up that the ambassador and others are doing, not just the ambassador in Abu Dhabi, but the ambassador in Delhi as well. They are both working to try and get it done. So I think politically, there is no issue, but let me give you a case in point. Abu Dhabi Investment Authority wants to invest more. We want them to invest more. It is the kind of long-term patient capital that our economy needs. We had, and they were keen to invest into the Indian stock markets along with FDI. We had a regulation, which was kind of, we had China at the back of our mind when we made that rule in 1996 or something, that no entity from any country can invest more than 10% in the stock holding of a particular company. Now, UAE says, I have 3 sovereign funds or 4. There's Abu Dhabi Investment Company, there's the Dubai Investment Corporation, there's the Sharjah Investment Corporation, there's Abu Dhabi Investment Authority itself. Under SEBI laws, they are all clubbed together as one because we follow the unique beneficial owner principle, that ultimately the beneficiary is the king, kind of thing, even though they have different managements, different objectives, etc., etc. So my friends in RDA would say, you may have a notional cap of 10%, which I have no intent of breaching at this stage. But the reality is, I don't know what Mubadala is investing. So today my board says that Bajaj is a good stock to have, or Honda, Hero Motors is a good stock to have. And I should put in another 500 crores into it. My investment council says yes, but I've kept a self-imposed limit of 2.5%. Because I am just anticipating that maybe Mubadala is thinking the same way and they're also buying and they're also buying. So it took us years to persuade Ministry of Finance and SEBI. And last year in the budget speech, the finance minister actually made this announcement, if you go back to the papers, making almost an exception for RDA to enable it to invest into Indian stocks. But it came with so many riders that even that 1 year elapsed. And now in this year's budget speech, the finance minister has announced a further liberalization to the liberalization. And mind you, what are we liberalizing? We are allowing people to invest into India.
Professor Kumaraswamy, I didn't want to stifle your questions. Please go ahead.
No, sir. Let others have this place. Let others have it.
Okay. Mudassir, you have a few questions.
Thank you, sir.
And may I request all the people whom I'm going to invite now that a number of your questions have already been answered by Ambassador Suri. So please do not ask, I request you not to make repetitive questions.
Thank you, sir. My name is Mudassir Qamar. I'm Associate Fellow at IDSA. I have two very specific questions. And thanks for giving that very kind of fascinating account. It puts kind of reality to what we hear in the news and a lot of things which we don't understand. So thanks a lot for that. There was a MOU signed between ISRO and UAE space program in May 2016, but it seems not much could take place afterwards. So any idea why actually did not make much progress? And second is related to the point which you mentioned at the beginning about OIC. I mean, obviously it was a great to see a former foreign minister at the OIC. But then it seems that breakthrough moment has kind of, again, we have gone back to the same cycle. So any comments on that, sir? Thank you.
Sure. On ISRO, actually, post the MOU, we were in touch with the UAE Space Agency, and we were able to facilitate that Dr. K. Radhakrishnan, former chairman ISRO, and the man who was closely involved with our Mars mission, became an advisor to the UAE Space Agency. And he's been participating in their meetings, and they've had a team visit. And so in the subtext to their Mars program is some of the collaboration or some of the knowledge base that we have provided. So things that have been happening. They may not make the headlines, but the fact that Dr. Radhakrishnan, a person, a scientist of his eminence, is a respected member, and they really value his participation in the meetings of the UAE Space Agency, and he's been coming quite regularly for those. On the OIC, I think we should look at it at two levels. One is there's nothing that we can do about stopping OIC from issuing inane statements about India. This is how they work. you look closely and those statements with little change of names can be applied to Armenia, it can be applied to Bosnia, it can be applied to other places. And you know, partly it is the way OIC works, that the trade-offs between members, there's this tradition that they have built of allowing single country agendas to be pursued. So Turkey can hit out at Cyprus without any problems, and Saudi Arabia wants to do its own thing, and so on. So each country uses OIC to further or address its pet peeves. And the OIC structure enables countries to do that. For us, the additional problem, of course, is that there are a large number of Pakistanis in the OIC Secretariat. And so they are able to have an inside track on processes which we from outside can't. The more, I think, substantive thing is that after that, having accepted the invitation to attend an OIC Foreign Ministers Conference, what next? Are we going to think in terms of joining the organization? If so, how, when, on what terms? I think those are, to me, more interesting questions. To me, the foreign ministers meeting meant that we had kind of breached a Pakistani citadel. That they no longer had the carte blanche. And if you look at it, because of the relationship that we've had with the UAE and Saudis, we've been able to stymie Pakistani efforts to bring Kashmir post Article 370 the way they would have wanted to. And you've seen the frustration of Imran Khan and Qureshi and others with the Saudis for not being able to get their way in OIC. So I think, look at it at two levels: the statements that count for nothing, and the substantive part of, is OIC still being used as an anti-Indian body? I think we've been able to make a difference by virtue of our bilateral relations with a number of key member countries. But as I said, the next part is for people like you to deliberate upon.
The relationship with the OIC will be a complicated one, especially given the rules of the OIC, which was last framed under Pakistani pressure in Senegal about membership, observership, etc. So those are issues that have to be dealt with initially. Dr. Gopi Krishna, you have a number of questions. May I request you to confine yourself to one, please?
I'm not doctor yet, but my interest is so as I said, what role does UAE play in India's increasingly transformative West Asia policy, especially how is India able to balance its relations with Israel on one hand and its traditional Palestine policy on the other? And also, is this a strategic shift for India, or is it a one administration policy? Because this is under Prime Minister Modi, we have completely gone to a wholly new level of partnership with Israel, although we had relations from quite a long time. So is this is our shift completely? Is it a strategic shift, or is it just a temporary measure?
Look, I think each of the points that you've mentioned, in a sense, establishes that in foreign policy, we shouldn't get boxed into either or paradigms, which means that there's no reason for us to presume that we will have a close relationship with Israel and junk our support for the Palestinians. Doesn't work that way. So while we definitely have a very good relationship with Israel, and particularly the security cooperation for us is very valuable, but we continue with our support to the Palestinians. Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian PM to visit Israel. He also became the first Indian PM to visit Ramallah. And somehow, that part gets forgotten. similarly, our relationship with UAE did not mean that we stopped talking to Iran, for example, or Qatar, for example, where they just had a rapprochement, but they were not on talking terms for the last 4 years. So, for us, the emphasis really is, and I think most countries understand that now, that it doesn't have to be either or. Yes, we can have a very special relationship with one country. We can have much more substance in a relationship with one country, but it doesn't mean that we will forego our ties with another, nor I think is there an expectation that we should. I think there's a level of maturity and understanding that enables us to maintain these relations with countries that may otherwise be at loggerheads with each other.
Dr.
Yeah, sorry.
Samina Hamid.
One point from Gopi was that, is it a strategic shift or a one-time thing? I think it's, I don't see these things being changed if there's a change in government. I think that our relations with UAE should continue to grow. Our relations with Israel should continue to grow. And there's a certain momentum of their own in these relationships, which should transcend a Netanyahu or a Prime Minister Modi or whatever.
I'd like to bring into the conversation now Dr. Samina Hamid, who went with you to Riyadh. Samina.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador Suri. That was truly fascinating unpacking of the relationship from your personal vantage point. And we do expect, how much I know you, we do expect that kind of leaps under your term there. I happened to see a document which you signed as an ambassador, as our ambassador there. Memorandum of Understanding in Cooperation in the Field of Manpower, 2018. And I always wanted to ask you these two questions, which I'll put it now. Why did you choose to have an MOU rather than a bilateral labor agreement, which was more enforceable and which we had already signed with Saudi Arabia? So given your comfort level, we could have pushed for that. That is one. And if you compare this document, which is definitely an advancement over other MOUs signed with other countries, it has definitely certain positive points. But if you compare it with 2006 document, it has dropped out a very important clause, which I read the older document had: in case of any dispute arising in relations to the provision of the labor contract between the employer and the worker, both Arabic and English version shall be valid in case of dispute. But the document that you signed in 2018 omits this vital point. Was it a mistake or there was some thought to it? Thank you.
Look, the extent to which you can go in an MOU is the art of what the other side, how far is the other side willing to travel. And if you see one missing clause, I would also urge you to see some of the more forward-looking provisions in terms of what we've been able to do on e-migrate as a case in point. At the end of the day, the proof of the agreements is not just in the document, but in actual operationalization, in actual practice, right? And so you may have an agreement with Saudi Arabia, which seems to have stronger provisions, but you, as somebody who follows the Gulf very closely, would you say that Indian labor has been better off in Saudi Arabia or in UAE? In terms of a whole set of different parameters, including what happens when they get stranded, et cetera, et cetera. I say this because as a general trend, I see that the attitude of countries like UAE and countries like Qatar towards labor is becoming more progressive. It is still a long ways from desirable. There is, and I don't know whether it will become desirable from our perspective, so long as there's such a huge demand-supply gap, where the number of people willing to go and work in abysmal conditions is that large. So what I do want to say is that from our side, the areas where we've been able to make progress, and it's been tough, painstaking work, is in trying to connect our eMigrate portal with the UAE Labor Ministry's portal. And that has, TCS is handling that integration part. And once that happens, what it'll mean is that somebody, right now, all groups of workers have to go through eMigrate portal. And and it has empaneled manpower agents so that the practices of some of the unscrupulous agents can be stopped. So what you see is the integration of the eMigrate with the UAE Labor Ministry will mean the same contract is enforceable throughout. And Mrs. Sushma Swaraj took this really important meeting where, when we were trying to take this forward, where we had all the state NRI ministers present in Jawahar Bhavan. And in that meeting, she said, I am a lawyer. You show me why we can't accept the UAE contract, the UAE draft contract that for labor. And looking at what we had proposed and what UAE's standard document was, she said the UAE's is a superior document in terms of the protection that it affords to labor as compared to ours. Let's go with that. And so once we were able to make that change, what it means is that then you're no longer stuck on the language issue, because the same contract document is enforceable. And the same contract document is in our system. So I think, while I'll concede your point about, Arabic being the language, which is what they're preferring, but now they have, changed their rules to make it compulsory that an English language interpreter can be present, or sometimes English is not enough. Even a Malayalam language interpreter is present when the hearing is done. I will not say that conditions are perfect. I will simply make the limited point that compared to 10 or 15 years back, conditions are improving, partly because, thanks to Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, embassies today are far more cognizant of their responsibilities towards labor. It has become an integral part of an ambassador's job in the Gulf to be more responsive to labor needs, which wasn't the case perhaps as much earlier. And second is that the UAE, along with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, is itself, they realize that there is reputational damage to them if labor is treated badly. So we found that even on things like, let me give you one final point, that categories like cooks and drivers and domestic servants used to be outside the remit of Ministry of Labor. They used to be within the remit of Ministry of Interior because they were seen as personal staff. But now they've changed the rule, and even those categories have been put within the Ministry of Labor so that some kind of enforceability of contracts can be there.
Thank you, Ambassador Suri. I just would like to add one thing to your answer, is that people vote with their feet, and the vote is very clear. Despite all the difficulties, they have voted with their feet. I have here a number of questions. Is Divya there, or should I just read it out to you? It's a question from Divya Malhotra, which is something which has happened very recently. It says, with the normalization of ties between UAE and Israel in 2020, there is greater scope of cooperation between India, Israel, and UAE. What could be the possible areas of convergence which the three countries can explore together?
Our current ambassador in UAE used to be our ambassador in Israel. I'm sure he's going to have some really interesting ideas, but it's something that we've been thinking about. There are going to be areas of cooperation, whether it is in defense and security, whether it is in some of the economic domains. In fact, I've been invited to a webinar with the Israeli ambassador and the American Jewish Committee next week to discuss precisely some of these areas. I think right now there's an excitement, there's an interest. It is not unique. It is not just UAE, Israel, India. There are conversations of UAE, France, India that have been taking place. There are conversations taking place about, can we do joint projects in Africa, for example, where some of our expertise and some of UAE's financial resources can make a difference. I think countries are beginning to acknowledge that bilateral is nice, but sometimes not sufficient, and trilateral or minilateral can be more effective in terms of meeting the objectives. And so this might be some of the things that we will see emerging. At this point, I think it needs more work to be done.
On the bilateral aspect, Meenakshi wants to ask you whether India-UAE relations can help develop a multilateral forum for Gulf countries. And how can this bilateral relationship be leveraged towards achieving that?
Well, there is a multilateral forum of Gulf countries. It's called the GCC. And we do have a dialogue with the GCC, except that the dialogue had become sort of frozen over the last 4 years because of the rifts within the GCC itself. With Qatar as a key GCC member being out of the fold. Now that they've patched up, I think it does open up avenues for us once again. It's a dialogue that we are keen to develop. There were even some initial discussions on a possible India-GCC FTA and so on. Certainly the fact that we have good individual relations with each of the countries bodes well. So, I see it moving forward, that nothing much could happen while the GCC was divided amongst itself. But now that that hurdle is out of the way as of last month, we hope to see some progress in that.
And before we end, a personal question to you from Ankita Sanyar. Which part of the relationship, political or economic, did you see as more important or getting an upper hand?
For me, at a very personal level, I, think that we were able to make a bigger difference on the economic side. It took a lot more granular work. Politically, you have big picture coordination. It was certainly very satisfying that UAE was the only Arab country that post Article 370 spoke up for India, saying this is India's internal business and we are not going to get into it. Yes, that's very significant for us at a political level. But I think if we are looking at India's own economic development, then to me, the investment issues are far more significant. If we are able to iron out the bottlenecks and encourage Abu Dhabi Investment Authority or Mubadala to put serious money into the Indian economy, then that really helps with jobs, with infrastructure, a lot of different things. And time and again, they have expressed the intent to do it. And translating that into reality is hard work. And so when you are able to get few transactions done, whether in the energy sector or in the investment domain, I find that, maybe it's because you've been able to play a greater role in that as an ambassador. So that's more satisfying. But also, I've been a strong proponent of economic diplomacy. And so to me, that matters more.
Thank you, Ambassador Suri, for a fascinating expose on India-UAE ties as we go through this century. I think MEI is impressed by your eloquence and your knowledge and your scholarship. And I think we will have to tap you again on another country where you started your career and where you were ambassador later on at a very significant moment of his journey, that is Egypt. And I would request Professor Kumaraswamy to note this and use this invaluable resource to teach the young students who are attending this seminar, this webinar, because this will be a very practical way for them to understand something that they are used to theoretically. So thank you very much, Ambassador. With that, I hand it over to Professor Kumaraswamy to say the final few words.